Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Global America. Today, we will be reviewing period 3 of American history, so eloquently called. It goes up from 1754 to 1800, the election of 1800, and it starts right in the thick of the French and Indian War. So that's what our focus will be today. And we'll start with 6 major things to know about period 3. After the British and the colonists won the French and Indian War, England faced enormous debt. So they didn't really get out of this war scot-free. They definitely had a lot of problems to deal with, especially as this was really not the first time they've gotten into a scrap with the French, and it really wouldn't be the last. If you think about it, the Revolutionary War was really a extended war with the French as well, because the French were so heavily backing the American rebellious army. So the British, in the lead-up to the Revolutionary War, decided to tax the hell out of the colonists, and it led to resentment and tension with England. The Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party were 2 notable examples of this increasingly troubled relationship. Boston really the hotbed of revolutionary activity in the lead-up to the war. Colonial leaders called for resistance to imperial rule and demanded that their rights be respected. New experiments with democracy and republican forms of government came about with the Continental Congress, the ideas of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, and ultimately the Declaration of Independence. And it really was quite a novel idea that just hadn't been explored really in any governments, because this was kind of a extension of Enlightenment ideals, but in the kind of ideals of John Locke, and a lot of these people were heavily inspired by John Locke, especially kind of deep thinkers and kind of nerds like James Madison. They were big into that kind of stuff, but the thing was, they never really had the chance to do it, these Enlightenment thinkers, because their governments back in Europe were already so entrenched. They couldn't just go and start a rebellion over the King of England. He'd just been in there forever. So same thing with the French, until they actually did start a revolution in the 1780s and 1790s because of these revolutionary ideas last year. We talked a lot about that, but this was really the first opportunity to put these Enlightenment ideas into practice. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at some of what's going on here. After the American Revolution, the Articles of Confederation united the newly formed states. However, the federal government remained very weak, which was made evident by Shays' Rebellion. This triggered debates on how to govern the new country, culminated in the calling of the Constitutional Convention. So, throughout the presidencies of George Washington and John Adams, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists debated on how the young nation should manage its economy, foreign affairs, and internal relations with the new states. And this was really a debate between the people who wanted to see a stronger central government, the people who wanted to see or really had a deep fear of mob rule or rule of the people. This is Hamilton's idea. They wanted a republic led by a well-educated elite. They favored a looser interpretation of the Constitution that, for example, allowed them to create a federal bank. And that was based on the loose interpretation of the necessity clause of the Constitution, meaning the government can do things if it's necessary at the time that necessarily aren't in the Constitution. They wanted an economy based on shipping and manufacturing and industry and stuff like that. They favored payment of national and state debts, including creditors, and they had supporters. They were the elite, Hamilton was, pretty much. These included merchants, manufacturers, landowners, investors, lawyers, and the clergy or the church and the religious group there. So Jefferson supported sharing power with state and local governments and limiting the power of the national government, which kind of led to a weakened central government, the inability to enforce laws, as evidenced in the Shays' Rebellion, which is a rebellion over taxation. Another thing which the Congress at the time, under the Articles of Confederation, which, remember, was the first attempt at a government, they tried to put in some taxes, but people didn't really like it, and they couldn't really enforce them because, again, the state government had more power. The National Bank was unconstitutional. The economy should be based on farming. The payment of national debt, only a national debt should be taken out, just favoring the debtors in that time. And the supporters were the plains people, including the farmers and the tradespeople. So pretty much the more majority of Americans, a lot of the farmers out there, they're kind of the working class people in this area. So, yeah, the development of a distinct American foreign policy began to emerge. George Washington warned in his farewell address of becoming entangled in foreign affairs, such as the French Revolution, and preferred diplomatic initiatives like Jay's Treaty and Pinckney's Treaty to deal with continued European presence in America. Migration trends and competition over boundaries, resources, and trade fueled ethnic tensions and sparked nativist sentiments. The United States' relationship with American Indian groups continued to evolve, often centering around conflict regarding native lands that would soon come to a head that we'll probably discuss in our next period. So, all right, so let's roll right into our key topic, starting with the French and Indian War. This took place from 1754 to 1763, where it ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. So it's pretty much the name for the North American theater of the 7 Years' War. The North American theater is the only one you will really need to know about. It featured Britain, France, and their colonial and native allies fighting for control of North America east of the Mississippi. Obviously, the colonial side fought for the British because they had to. They were still, at that time, proud British subjects. So George Washington was part of the British Army at the time. But Native Americans kind of did their best to play both sides off each other and fought for both sides at various points in the war. So while the British won, though, they incurred massive amounts of debt in the process, taking them down the road that would really lead to a revolution and them losing their prized colonies in North America. George Washington came into our purview in this time period. He served as the first president from 1789 to 1797, but we'll get to that later. He started off as a land surveyor from Virginia. He led the colonial militia as an officer in the French and Indian War to great fame and success, but of course later he really made his name when he led the Continental Army during the American Revolution at battles such as the Battle of Valley Forge and Yorktown. Later, though, he presided over the Continental Congress. Among many other acts, he established the informal two-term limit for presidents by declining to run for re-election in 1796. So, yeah, Benjamin Franklin was a big player in both the Revolution and the establishment of the new government, and before that as well. He was a big inventor. He invented bifocals, the Franklin stove, the lightning rod, the swivel chair. Although some say Thomas Jefferson also invented the swivel chair, but that's not a really big deal. He was an early campaigner for American unity. He tried to create the Albany Plan of Union that originally failed. He served as the first U.S. ambassador to France from 1776 to 1785, and was actually instrumental in getting French involvement in the war. He signed both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and died in 1790 at age 84. So the Albany Plan of Union, let's go a little bit more to that, is a proposal proposed by the Albany Congress under the guidance of Benjamin Franklin during the French and Indian War. It called for a confederation of colonies to defend against attack by European and native foes. It was rejected by the colonial assemblies due to concern over the central consolidation of power and by the British government because they felt it allowed for too much colonial independence. So it didn't really catch on at that time, but obviously sooner rather than later, it would catch on. So William Pitt is another character you need to know about at this time. He was known as William Pitt the Elder, also. He was a Whig statesman who shifted British efforts in the French and Indian War from colonial skirmishes to the capturing of Canada, with key victories in Louisbourg and Quebec, and in Montreal. This effectively removed France's presence from North America, pretty much winning the war for the British, and that led to the Treaty of Paris, the treaty which capped off the French and Indian War. The British took control of French Canada and Spanish Florida, effectively removing France's presence from North America. And that led to some pretty bad post-war conflicts with American Indians, such as Pontiac's Rebellion. It was an 18-month conflict with the American Indians of the Ohio Valley, led by Chief Pontiac, the leader of the Ottawa people. Natives attacked British colonial settlements from the Great Lakes to Virginia, resulting in the Proclamation of 1763. So King George III barred American colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains. The British saw this as a quick and easy way to make peace while securing the fur trade, which is a big part of their motivation signing this, to get really as much money out of it as possible. Colonists, however, were incensed by the Crown's interference and their inability to settle the land that they really had won and fought for in the French and Indian War. The colonists often ignored it, and it was a contributing factor, a pretty important one as well, to the American Revolution. So, the French and Indian War led to the passing of the Currency Act, which is a law passed by Parliament in 1764. It led to the use of colonial paper money in order to protect British merchants from the depreciation of currency. While not a major contributing factor in the American Revolution, it did signify growing British interest in regulating the colonies, and the idea of trying to end the quote-unquote salutary neglect. And the thing was, this tax here, that was not the only tax. The taxes really just kept coming fast and furious. It started with the Sugar Act in 1764. It raised the previous amount of demanded on sweeteners, which is molasses and sugar. Part of the British attempts, again, to pay off debt from the French and Indian War. They really did kind of take it on the colonists there, who in large part did fight for them and were in large part a big reason why they won. And boy, did the colonists really know this, and they didn't like, especially being taxed without representation in Parliament. The Quartering Act was a big insult as well, a 1765 act that required colonists to provide room and board for British soldiers stationed in America. It was wildly unpopular. This practice was again later banned by the Third Amendment of the Constitution, really kind of a amendment that we'd never really have had to use again, but still you can really tell that it pissed off the American people so much they decided to put it in their most important governing document, that you could not quarter troops. Because when you quarter troops, they wouldn't just be like, they wouldn't make the bed after them. They wouldn't clear the dishes. Like they would pretty much have your way with your livestock, have your way with your resources that you saved up for your family. Like it wasn't a good scenario. So that is so that was a big sticking point for them. George Grenville was the British Prime Minister who passed the Currency, Sugar, Quartering, and Stamp Acts. Patrick Henry was a founding father and a very radical young Virginian lawyer and patriot. In reaction to the Stamp Act, he accused the British government of usurping the rights guaranteed to colonists as Englishmen. So the British people really thought of them as kind of fake Englishmen, really, because they weren't in the country. They kind of viewed them, and this kind of animosity and this kind of disdain kind of started in the the French and Indian War, when they had their first real interactions when British troops came over. And British troops often viewed the colonists as rednecks and hicks and people to be looked down upon, and that really didn't sit well with the colonists. No surprise there. James Otis is another example of one of these patriots from Massachusetts. He coined the phrase, "taxation without representation is tyranny." So popularly abbreviated to the phrase we all know as "no taxation without representation." So next came the Stamp Act Congress, which was a meeting of representatives from 9 of the 13 colonies. They sent word to England that the only colonial legislatures had the authority to tax the colonists. It was repealed in 1776, the Stamp Act was, and replaced with the Declaratory Acts. But meanwhile, these twin groups, the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, a group of patriot activists who intimidated tax collectors by attacking their homes, burning them in effigy, and even tarring and feathering them. They also ransacked warehouses that held stamps and burned them to the ground. So this is something that really would not happen today. A real example of just a radical, violent even revolution. So Samuel Adams was a big role in this. He led the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. He was a founding father as well. He also penned the Massachusetts Circular Letter in 1768, which demanded the Townshend Act, plural, be repealed. But first, before we talk about that, we got to get to the Declaratory Acts,